Welcome to Dysfictional, the RPG-focused podcast that casts Modify Memory on ourselves so you don't have to. I'm Randy, the Random Generator.
I'm Tukey, former academic, I think, and still a ranger, I think.
I'm Ginger, and I'm definitely still a professional film industry victim. Although, how long do you have to go without having a job before you're not considered professional anymore?
Or a victim, sheesh.
Anyway.
So we've got a topic tonight about combat encounters.
Ooh.
And some other things. But for now, let's talk about combat encounters.
Run away!
Right, yeah. So, part of the bread and butter of a D&D group that I think a lot of us tend to build around. Some of us build around socials, but I feel like socials can be hit or miss with some groups, but almost every group is going to have probably combat encounters. I think we want to do it in a perspective of like DMs and players. I'll start. Personally, I think that the combat encounters should be engaging. I don't want them to be random either as much. I'm not a big fan of just, oh, hey, you're walking down the woods and 3 wolves attacked you. Give or take, like the start of a campaign, sure, like you could have the more random stuff, but a lot of them having the meaning and not quote unquote wasting time is better. I'd rather have like a group of acolytes that you were hunting down that actually attacked you in the woods. That way you kind of have even a more, let's say, beef with them. And I typically build my encounters around what's going on. Like if you're in the Underdark, you're going to be fighting Underdark things. That's kind of obvious. But I try to have, like, actually this campaign that we're doing right now, I have a lot based around religions and deities and stuff, more so than any of my other ones. And I kind of want that to be reflected. Like if you're fighting someone, you're like, oh, I immediately know what that's from once, of course, the players find out what they're from.
I really like when encounters, and you've done this quite a few times, Randy, but encounters have phases to them almost, or feel like they're progressing in just the combat itself. So not just like waves of enemies, but, you know, maybe as you defeat a couple of enemies, the bodies of those merge together into another being or get sacrificed because there was a ritual set up the whole time and it summoned something else when they died, or
yeah,
other enemies were in the other room doing something and they heard you fighting, like, and came in. Little things like that make the encounters feel a lot less just random, like you said. Oh, here's a few wolves to fight.
Or padding.
Yeah, the padding. And some people do like the padding, and obviously some DMs need to use the padding for build-up moments or other things too. But I've really enjoyed when combats feel like, not just intense, but they feel like there's more going on to them than just the fighting.
I think another part of combat encounters and kind of building them and stuff too is, like you said, when a bunch of enemies die, they turn into a bigger enemy and they have phases. It's also to try to soften up the party, because doing like, say, I don't tend to do like, you know, if you encounter a short rest, a few more encounters all the time. Typically, we'd probably go through, I'd say 2-3 encounters at most during a single day. And usually they've been together. There are exceptions, but typically I do it almost like back to back. And it kind of weakens the party for the big boss to almost give them more of a chance, because 5e, the players are pretty powerful. And especially with casters, it's not nearly as great for them, although maybe now it will be a little bit better with counterspell.
And we're Gestalt characters, which makes it trickier.
Yeah, exactly. So I do like how well received the phases and stuff are. We even had one where like the lava slowly building up in a pit while you're all fighting within the pit. There are ways of avoiding it, but eventually you're losing more and more ground the longer the fight goes. I think things like that make it a little more interesting than just hit the thing, but it's like environmental threats is a fun addition to just a normal, what can make a normal encounter be really interesting.
I still think about that lava fight all the time.
Yeah.
That was the closest I think I ever came to permadeath. And it wasn't even that I was close.
I missed.
If you had not missed that last shot, I would have been gone forever.
The rolls were in your favor.
You know, what can I say? All of my millions of deities were looking out for me. When I was DMing, one of the things I really liked to do at lower levels was try to find a way to make the encounters, like you said, not feel like, oh, you come across 3 wolves in the woods. But you want to give lower level and especially new players a chance to try out their mechanics, right?
Yes.
And get like used to the rules and everything. And you don't want it to be too impossible or too difficult for them. You also don't want to give them an enemy that is capable of one-shotting, like your level 2 party on accident when you really you're just trying to lead them along a little bit to get established. Not that there's anything wrong with the accidental, like, whoops, I crit.
I did that.
My level 1 guy has to roll a new character. But, the intent is never to TPK a party under at least under level 3, I would think.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I like to try to do, was exactly what you said, environment. All of your players' senses, do they have dark vision? Do they have, and use the things that they do or don't have in your fight plan. And one of my favorite ones, I think that my players were I want to say they were level 2. They went into a cave under a mountain. They were hired to go try to find someone that had gone missing. And they were they didn't know what they were looking for. And as they went through sort of the cave, the dungeon, they came across a goblin that turned out to be an NPC that they talked into helping them find the monster that was making people disappear under the mountain. And the goblin's name was Bucket. She was my favorite. So, of course, they immediately adopted her and she became part of the team. And they're going through the mountain and and she's telling them that it's a dragon, right? So they're level 1, level 2, and they're immediately, because you can also just build anticipation, they're immediately we're going to die in here, right? Because even though I know my plan is not to kill them, I don't want them to know that. So this dragon had been basically making demands from the village for all of their treasure, and it was a fishing village, so it was they wanted a percentage of everything, percentage of the fish and a percentage of the gold and all this kind of stuff, and it was hoarding treasure under the mountain. Well, long story short, they finally get there. It's a big amphitheater, natural rock amphitheater, and the dragon is back up in a cave at the very top of it. And none of them had a climb speed or a fly speed. They had to sort of lure the dragon out to them to get hits off on it. And it was really dark and it was kind of far away, but it had a lot of ranged characters, so I knew they could get hits off on it. It took several rounds of combat before someone finally rolled a high enough perception check to figure it out. And then I think they shot a flaming arrow at it and it caught on fire. And that was a big clue as well. But the gimmick of the whole thing was that the dragon was literally a giant mechanical puppet that a bunch of kobolds built.
Nice.
And they were using it to intimidate a whole town of halflings and get all of the fish and stuff. But it was actually basically just 5 kobolds in a trench coat. And afterwards, all of the players said they weren't expecting that and they were actually really scared of the dragon and that it was really fun. And so stuff like that is always, you could be as creative as you want with your encounters, but the end goal is always just to try to make sure that your players have a fun time.
Yeah. So whenever you were talking about using the players and what they have, I've done that a lot. There are especially puzzles. I typically will have a puzzle that I've got ways that the specific players can solve it. Usually I use spells that they already have prepared as well. That way they don't have to really do anything special. If you switch out your preparers and kind of ruin things, well, I always have a 2 or 3 person that could do it. It's just one person might be the easiest. Let's say knock to unlock a door versus someone trying to dispel a magic and then also lock picking it, as an example. But then similar with you, I had, of course, in our second campaign, had one of our players be pretty much unforgivingly ambushed and during the attack was killed off by a dragon. But it was a good dragon. Picked him up, revived the player, and then it was an introduction to that dragon. And it was a good introduction for the stuff in general while everyone else was kind of lost in a maze of reefs. So that was a cool encounter I liked as well. Kind of, like you said, sort of having these crazy expectations and seeing this giant dragon breath going, oh, golly, this isn't good. And then it's, oh,
yeah.
Good, you're a nice dragon. Then she dies and everyone's super sad.
Sad. Yeah, that encounter was what I would like to subcategorize as your typical video game cutscene encounter, where you're like, oh, this is scripted. I can't do anything about it.
I definitely like, I mean, both of you guys have mentioned about how you kind of can build up to fights or combats, you know, getting players to think certain things or giving them information ahead of time, or maybe there's a mystery involved before that there's a combat situation. I always like as a player to really try to stay in character through those moments. You know, even if Tukey, like me, doesn't think what we're fighting is crazy or is really worried about what we're fighting, that doesn't matter as much as, well, what is my character thinking or how would they approach that situation? So I think combat are also times, and even during combat situations, are times where you can also flex your RP skills in different ways, maybe ones that you didn't necessarily think about. And combat encounters, I always find, can have lots of character development, particularly group development. You know, do team members work together during a combat? Does one accidentally hit the others with an AoE spell and then everyone gets mad at that character for a while? You know, a lot of things can happen.
Does one on purpose hit someone with an AoE
I mean,
spell?
there's a lot of things that can happen in combat, and those can even keep playing out throughout other character interactions.
So how do you balance your enemy group sizes? Depending on level, right, of your players, you can obviously throw more things at, but do you prefer to throw like a whole ton of things that are small versus like more powerful, like larger amounts, you know, smaller amounts, but like more powerful creatures? Or do you like to henpeck everyone to death, like in that second Jurassic Park with like the little compy dinosaurs, which is also one of my worst fears, by the way?
I'll be honest, I love doing both, but with our median being Fantasy Grounds, it's not as fun to have a whole bunch of creatures on the screen because I have to drag each and every one of them individually, and it takes a bunch of time to go through a lot of them. But part of the danger and fun of the encounters is seeing a bunch of little things and, let's say, fireballing the whole group, which often doesn't end up happening anyway. But having those kinds of creatures mixed in is fun, and having not just these entities that are two people in this random area, why are they basically by themselves, to give it a little more believability with larger groups. But I have had my fair share of the smaller ones. I mean, Tukey, you were talking about the bunch of people merging into the one, and so which was a bigger encounter. And then we had the one with the lava where I think it was 4, maybe 5 entities at most. And one of them wasn't even participating in most of the battle. So I consider that a medium size amount of people. Usually one person just gets trucked because the players are just too powerful for one person. The action economy is your biggest friend. That's why getting rid of the numbers and having the numbers on your side is the most important thing. And then as far as balancing, I don't even use the CR. I just kind of have a bunch of, I would say my CRs are often double the player levels, if not more, because usually you guys handle it just fine regardless. I mean, you guys were like level like 6 one time, defeated level CR 18, and I was like, okay, so that's how this is going to play out.
We are Gestalts, just again, for record.
True, but she also had a double phase and still got trucked like almost the entirety of the second phase before she even got to do anything. I was like, wow, that was 400 HP they went through. Wow.
Yeah, but that was also because someone got real lucky on that banishment save.
I think the sweet spot tends to be having a little bit more enemies than players, at least from our fights that we've had. That usually works out well because it's not like a pure 1-to-1. It's not like, okay, everyone just focus this one thing because then there'll be too many others. Having a few more than what is players is always nice because it just gives you different options too. It makes you have to think about other enemies. But I know as far as the player, which one I like more, it really depends on the character itself, which I know is like a vague cop-out answer, but there are some characters like my last one, the Rogue Bard, that was basically like a one-punch man kind of character. Large groups of small enemies were not her strong suit. Sure, I could take out a couple per round, but if there was a whole swarm of enemies, it just didn't work. And I think you even ended up changing the swarming mechanics a little bit at one point, which helped. But that character much more preferred, bigger enemies. versus other characters I've had in the past as well that have like AoE spells and lots of little damage going out. Those can really thrive with larger groups of small enemies. So, honestly, a lot of it comes down to like what I enjoy as a player, comes down to the character that I'm playing, their skills, their personality. It can definitely depend.
One of the mechanics that I added was having a bunch, let's say like 5 zombies are one single token, and you're basically still going through 5 zombies, but they're one token. And for that specific example, yeah, you hit it, and then the extra damage can go on to the next zombie, which is great. But if I have them split, if I had 5 separate zombies, it doesn't work the same. It's specifically with the hordes. But this actually ties back even with the combat encounters where I know you're not good at AoE. So there are encounters where there's a lot of AoE where the casters can shine. And then there's some of the other ones where you get the big boss and you're like, now it's my time. And that's another aspect that I think about the players is what are their strengths? And I want to use some of them and some of them I don't want to use. Not that I don't want to use, but some of them aren't meant to be the spotlight. They could still get in the spotlight, but like everyone's going to have their chance in a combat encounter to be really cool at some point.
The swarm was funny though, because again, as like a one punch man or one hit kind of style that my character was at one point, you'd have like a little skeleton in front of it with 20 health and I'd smack it for 100 damage and then be like, well, 80 of that just went to waste.
Yeah.
So having the swarm obviously was a big help, but also evolving the player style. So like that character was very much hitting mostly one thing around. Then towards the middle started to kind of switch to a little bit of a different style where I found ways to like spread the damage around a little more. Still, the character never became an AoE character for its combat, but multi-target, exactly, like small multi-target groups. But yeah, definitely different styles. And we had other characters who really thrived with tons of enemies because they had Dawn or other large scale abilities.
Like destroy undead.
Yeah.
That was a fun day for me.
Yeah. And I full on, that was a great part of that as well. Knowing we should probably do something with the undead. And you got your big, cool, awesome moment, got to use it. You were really happy. I was happy you actually used it because sometimes players forget their things and I'm not going to tell them because it's their character. And that's rolling big hints there. So
the funniest one, though, actually, for that was obviously the turn undead. Like my big moment was with the vampire horde. But I did use it again later one time when we were in between rounds of combat. We were like moving from a combat we had just finished. We were going down a hallway to get to the next combat, basically. And a whole bunch of ghosts popped up around us.
Yeah.
And we were like, ugh. And I used it to get rid of all the ghosts. And it was so funny because they were really low level ghosts. And it was like 12 tokens went pop up on the map. And I went, no. And then they all went away. And we were like, all right, just keep moving. But even though it's like, oh, well, I just completely disintegrated that whole room of enemies, I was going to use that use of channel divinity for the boss in the next room, and I didn't have that anymore. So it still impacted like the usage, right? Like your economy for the rest of the fight. But I couldn't risk us all getting possessed on the way to the big bad, So it's like, it was still worth it, but it still cost something. It wasn't just like a fun throwaway, like, haha, I did a fun thing and it didn't cost me anything.
Yeah, and that's a big thing I think about with the combat encounters and why I like doing phases, whether it's enemy after enemy after enemy, almost like a gauntlet, or if it's just different mechanics start happening, is that it starts eating through your economy. That way, again, once you reach the big bad, you're like, I'm down like half my spell slots at this point. This is not good. And you may have used some of your big ones, then cool. I don't have to worry about some of those big ones. But with the Destroy Undead was, again, an example of just creating the encounters for you. And for me, when I build something like that and I throw out 12 ghosts and then 6 other enemies, I'm like, God, I hope they get rid of those ghosts quickly because I don't have to deal with them myself.
We're just doing all your dirty work.
Yes, get rid of the fodder. Let's get to the juice. But if you don't, then the fodder just slowly eats the players up. And they realize how much damage a CR 1/4 can do if they hit you enough times.
Just like the compies in Jurassic Park, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, another funny way to change the size of the enemies compared to the group is mind control tactics or charming, which technically players can do as well to turn some enemies on their side. But Randy, I think that was definitely one in the last campaign. One of the ways that you consistently tried to use as a way to nullify the high damage output that my character was doing. I honestly don't remember how many times you tried to charm my character.
All of them.
It never worked, but you definitely tried it a lot.
Well, the main reason for that was just because you were the only one that could be charmed. But also as a point there, like I did charm some people I knew would be immune to it because the NPC doesn't know that. But then when you have like an elf, you know they're resistant charm. When you have these certain creatures, other creatures do inherently know that one's not going to work on them, but you're just a tabaxi. Like, why would you be resistant to charm?
Yeah, and I would have totally destroyed at least one party member before it got stopped because my character was doing a lot of damage.
It would have been me.
Yeah, right.
Probably.
And sometimes it's a DM meta, but like for the sake of the encounter being interesting, is not trying to use weaknesses and stuff. Like I want like you're immune to charm. I'm still going to charm you every occasional, but I don't want to be always trying to charm you because I'm wasting a mechanic and their action economy where they could die the next turn to do something that I know is not going to work. And then it's just easy for you guys. You know, you get that little bit of meta where you're like, all right, well, that one's not resistant to charm, so I'm going to do that. But then sometimes I think for you, it ended up happening because the way you interacted sometimes too. You typically were the person that like got front enough that they were like, oh, well, fuck you then.
Or they'd see me do a big hit and they'd be like, okay, well, I don't want to deal with that. Or, hey, I'm going to use that.
Yeah. Like I also had an encounter where you guys were in, of course, the maze, and each of you had your own way to navigate the maze, and the ways out, only one of you could actually get the way out of each of them. Of course, Ginger, you found yours, and then one of the legendary items was going to be difficult for everybody, but they could have done it, like just resistance to poisons and stuff like that, but one of our players happened to be immune to it, so they got to go in there and grab it no problem, including I think the creature that attacked them was like a poison cloud, like a creature poison cloud, and it literally does nothing to him. So,
and that was sheer luck because we did not know that when I sent him in there instead of someone else, I was just like, you're fast, you can backtrack, like you go.
And he was also nowhere near it.
Yeah, he was nowhere near it. I just picked him because he was like not already on a different mission. And then it turned out he was like, oh, I can just waltz in here and grab the Rod of Resurrection and waltz back out again. And it was just sheer luck, but one of those funny, ironic things.
Yeah, so that was like a great example where I have other people that could do it, but he's the easiest way to do it. Sure enough, he got to do it, and accidental or not, it worked out to y'all's favor, which is great. And then the Orb of Destruction, which is something that more requires an intelligence creature. Luckily, you guys, I think you actually got your intelligence creature later on to grab it rather than just like dealing with it immediately.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think I just walked away from it initially.
Would have attempted it, but it would have been really hard versus that one. I had a little bit easier time with it. So that's another way to use the encounters is like I'm just constantly knowing enough of what the players can do and then figuring out something fun to add in.
I'm pretty sure for the Orb of Destruction, I came across it first, but I only had one arm at the time, and I did not want to go anywhere near it with the one arm. But the last thing for encounters that we haven't talked about is, and maybe this is a small one, but the scale of the environment itself that the encounter comes into play. I know as a player, I kind of find fun in both, although I do tend to enjoy small scale encounters more, a little bit because I find the small scale encounters to be somewhat less complex and a little more limiting with skills you can do and spells, which is also negative, but at some points can also be fun to try to think of, clever ways to get around the limitations of the space. Plus, there's not as much movement involved, and then you can also have more like collaboration and teamwork in a smaller space. But yeah, I mean, obviously large scale spaces have their strengths too.
Definitely as a spell sniper, I was finding myself really leaning towards the larger scale ones last campaign until kind of right at the end. I started staying closer to the party just because they needed more support more often. But there were 2 or 3 fights that I spent a good 200 feet away from everybody else, just slinging spells. And it was pretty crazy, but it's funny, the opposite perspectives, right? Because you had a melee character that was like a really heavy hitter and you like to be up in it. So it's like, yeah, the smaller scale ones are good for you because you don't have to chase people down. But for me, I preferred the longer scale ones. And now it's switched because for this campaign, my movement is nowhere near what Domino's movement was. And also I'm not a spell sniper anymore. But now I believe that you might be. You have a long range at least. So it'll be interesting to see if you start liking the longer base stuff now too instead. So I think it kind of just depends on what your kit is in the moment, for me at least.
And that was another way of encounters is I will have those where I'm like, she's a spell sniper. You have to give them that moment to go max range. Because then what was the point otherwise? And it's so much fun to do the max range. I mean, you were on like a cliffside shooting down at a giant worm that was like 200 feet below while the party was honestly being eaten
in the
by
worm.
I was inside the worm.
So there was that. And then I also want to have the encounters where you're a lot weaker with it, where it's, this 15 by 15 foot cubed room with 3 enemies in there. And you have no choice but to be at their face.
The worst.
Because then that changed the dynamic for you. It's like, okay, this is my bread and butter, but I'm in an uncomfortable situation basically in terms of combat. Crap, now how do I adapt?
Face step.
I'm going to cast this giant AoE spell, but the room is a 10 foot by 10 foot room and all my allies are right in the middle of it too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I accidentally killed somebody trying to do that.
Yep.
I mean, I never got the spell off. I wanted him to like move so that I could get it off without hurting him. But then when he moved, he took an opportunity attack and he went down. And then
the dwarf never killed someone.
Instead of casting the spell, I brought him back to life like a responsible cleric.
I never got anyone killed.
I didn't get to do my move.
I just died trying to protect other people. Good times.
I'm just giving you the stern face.
I'm just ignoring it.
I can feel it. Speaking of ignoring it, have you guys been hearing that noise as well?
Yeah, I figured it was just like, it's like a weird like squishy noise. Like
a flop, like something like that.
Oh.
I'm gonna go check it out. I hope everyone's ready for some Dissectional. It's a segment where we ask biological D&D questions for monsters that no one was asking for. Flop, flop, flop. Are they jellyfish that can fly? Are they weird little tentacled pastors that want to preach the gospel to the Underdark? Are they portable fans? One thing we do know is that they're so cute. Or gross. I don't know. But they're flumps.
Flump!
They have a weird name.
They're just little guys. I mean, they're actually kind of big guys, but they're little guys.
They're named after the sound they make when they fly. They go flump, 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 flump.
Okay, do you want to know exactly immediately what they remind me of the most?
No.
What?
Okay, in Treasure Planet, at the very beginning, when they're at the spaceport, and there's an alien thing that kind of looks like an ooze, and it speaks fluent flatula.
Gross.
What's a fart?
It's like an ooze, and it speaks with a series of various wind
Farts?
noises that it passes through its various flaps. But their language is called flatula. They speak fluent. They're fluent in flatula. But it reminded me of a flump because they go flump, 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 flump. Because of the air that they suck in while they move that makes them hover. Treasure Planet's a great movie. You should watch it.
Honestly, it kind of reminds me of like anything from Rick and Morty. But getting more serious about them,
Flumps?
the flumps, of course. This is a very, very serious topic. They are kind of like these floating saucer shape type things. A couple feet in diameter and maybe like a half a foot at its thickest, but they have kind of a center hole on their top where they take in air, and then they have a couple of eye stalks that kind of come around around that hole, and then they also have lots of little tentacles and spikes on their underside.
The acidy.
Possibly part of their defense. Yes, very acidy. And I also have a lot of other little gaps and holes around the bottom and sides to propel themselves, because air can come out of those as well.
And they smell real bad.
Yeah, they don't particularly smell good. Their body itself is pretty hollow, and that kind of keeps them light. I think that combined with some innate anti-gravity field around them lets them essentially float around pretty easy. And then they just suck in air and push it out their sides to kind of propel themselves around, making that noise that you were kind of mentioning before.
Same, am I right?
It's definitely a way to get around. They also have some other interesting features about their bodies, one of which is color changing. So they'll typically kind of glow faintly a color depending on their mood, or at least they could. I think pink is amusement, blue is sadness, green is curiosity, and red is anger. So if you do see one,
Hope it's not red.
yeah, hope it's not red. Or maybe you do hope it's red because you're looking for something evil. And maybe it means that it was exposed to some evil thoughts and is now angry. So can serve as a warning sign as well to adventurers.
Yeah.
Evil thoughts also make me mad.
I guess it depends on the kind of evil. I am chaotic neutral after all. But as flumps being passive creatures, they flump, 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 flump around other psionic beings, such as the last week's Mind Flayer, to feed on psionic energy. Despite hanging around many evil creatures, they have a pure nature, so they're not fans of the creatures. So they kind of tend to hang around like Gith and Abolus out of more of a necessity. They tend to feed as much as they need. I don't even think the creatures would really notice, but their environment just is often just outside of another creature's settlement when they're not just drifting by. And since they're passive, they're often hunted for food. So they tend to have that little negative. They're a little more of a prey type, unfortunately. One note I do have about them is that they would be a great society piece. One of my little just headcanons while I was researching these creatures was them having this advanced knowledge. They could make for very interesting librarians or scholars. They could even have an entire cloister that could be fulfilling different roles. They could be a reoccurring hub for the party and be a pretty great quest giver as well.
Definitely. I also thought they would be good at adventuring. They would be great aids for anyone who was on a quest to root out any kind of evilly aligned beings because of their special senses. You wouldn't need protection from good and evil all the time if you knew when it was around.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine, except they're a little more sentient than that.
They're also immune to having their thoughts read, so they're not going to tell the enemy stuff you don't want them to know.
Vulnerable to psychic damage.
Yes, unfortunately.
It's interesting that a being that feeds on psionic energy is vulnerable to psychic damage. It's almost like, I love this food, but it doesn't love me back.
I think that probably has a lot to do with how the energies of that affects them, like them getting angry or sad and stuff from those energies is probably that portrayal of the vulnerability, which is something that I would have had as well, where if you did like a vicious mockery, which is a psychic damage, then it would be really upset about it. And you just see it almost like you can tell it's crying even if it's not crying, and you just feel terrible that you vicious mockeried it. Exactly.
That's so sad. Why would you hurt a flump?
I don't know.
Well, hey, they do also have some survival measures. Kind of touched on these a little bit earlier, but their tendrils are acidic, and they can shoot out a sticky, foul-smelling fluid that can sicken creatures. So they usually will try to run away from fights or avoid fights in general, but they can kind of defend themselves if needed. Maybe it's not the most effective ways, but there is one really big downside they have, though, for their survival. And it's a little awkward, but they don't do so well if they get flipped over.
Yeah.
What happens?
Basically like a turtle.
Yeah, they have a particularly hard time righting themselves, unfortunately. So just don't tip over a flump, everybody. Just leave them be.
Easiest way to defeat one, I think.
Poor little guy.
I mean, if you were going to ask me how I would defeat it, that is what I would do. I would probably shoot a gust of wind at it to try to knock it over. It's mean, but it's effective.
I would try to defeat it by making friends with it because they are lawful, good, aligned creatures. And they even will sometimes in their little groups. Okay, so this is so cute. This is so cute, you guys. Their groups are called cloisters, and the little individual guys are called monks, and they have abbots, and they live at the priory. They're like,
God, that's so cute.
I don't like them.
They're like little church guys, and some of them even can cast cleric spells. And one thing that's really interesting is that occasionally the flump will adopt a lawful or even chaotic evil creature and turn it into almost like a thrall. They call them mind witnesses, and they will recruit them. They'll find like an isolated mind witness to recruit. And then oftentimes these are juvenile beholders. And once the flumps have taken it into service, it changes its worldview because of their positive influence and is no longer evil. So think about how useful having a flump with you could be. If it was your ranger companion, it could be detect good and evil. It could help influence things to not be evil. It can sense telepathic thoughts within 60 feet, so it would know if somebody was trying to spy on you, and it understands all the thoughts. Like, it doesn't have to know the language, which is really cool. And the goo that it spends out also does continuous poison damage until you can get it off, which is a pretty sick defense, I think. So yeah, you don't want him to flip over, but if you could protect him, he'd be pretty cool to take on your trip with you.
I think as a DM homebrew monster, if you guys wanted a higher level flump as well, being they are a 8th CR, that you could add some of their cleric spells and stuff and kind of bump them up and make it something a little more robust even. Bump up its HP a bit. Be kind of neat. Which, speaking of how I would kill the party with them, honestly, I'm going to assume that the party hurt one of them and the party just deserves to die at that point.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like I said, they strike me as a great quest giver. So they'd more likely indirectly kill the party by leading them to, say, like an Aboleth Slayer, because they will search out good, what they think are good thoughts, and they will send out evil thoughts. And even though they need those evil creatures to survive, they're willing to get rid of those creatures because they're evil. And then, like, again, the party may not be prepared for that, and they didn't mean to do that. They just, bad thing. Flump, flump, flump,
Yeah,
flump.
they don't know because they might be from space.
I just personally don't think I would want one around. I mean,
Well,
what if I just had to commit a crime, for good reasons, because that's happened before. And then it just turns red because it's angry that I committed a crime. And then they arrest me because the flump around me turned red. I don't know if I could risk that.
that's it, Randy. I need a flump.
It's too late. It already flew away. Flump, flump.
No, come back.
Flash round time. This is where we take turns picking one aspect of a character that anyone can use. If you play one, let us know who or what they conquer. All right, you two, roll initiative.
I got a 13.
18.
5.
Yes. Looks like I get to pick the race. And so, for races, there's so many options. And we've had most of them. I don't know if we've had a shifter yet. So let's go for a shifter.
Ooh, shifter, huh?
I think we had a changeling. Is that the same thing?
Wow.
It's not. It's not. I'm ashamed.
Shifters
Shame.
are the closest thing to a race that is like a lichen.
Oh, okay.
They gain like animal like features is like one of their traits, where they could like use claw attacks and stuff.
Will be a good one for that then. For the class, I'm going to go with monk.
Monkey.
If we're gaining animal features and we've got monk abilities, let's go drunken master for the subclass.
All right.
Well, are they always drunk?
If they are, they're a master at it.
Nice.
I like that too. So let's see. I feel like that they would be a type of were-tiger ancestor. So they're going to have just the standard stripes, but they're going to be white, like one of the white tigers. That's basically it. They'll have like a little bit of like their skin that's showing will be black, and then there'll just be the white and black stripes along where their furs are showing.
Will they be voiced by Angelina Jolie?
If she would be honored enough to voice, then yes.
That might be a little tricky to do. I'm sure we can make it happen.
I mean, she has to call us.
It was a Kung Fu Panda reference, just in case no one got that. But
What?
What?
Well, for their background, they're going to be a veteran. Very experienced.
I'd say for their personality trait, cheerful. Gonna always be the life of the party.
What kind of parties?
Oh, they're gonna be the kind of person who's like, after a long battle around the campfire, like pouring the drinks and telling the good old war stories and like rallying the troops, raising morale.
Well, their ideals are going to be that inquiry and curiosity are the pillars of progress. They're free thinkers,
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, for their bonds, then, we'll say they're slow to trust, but fast to get a drink with someone.
So for their flaw, the secret is they actually can't really drink that much without knowing they're going to have a really bad hangover the next day. So after the first couple, it's all sleight of hand.
Oh. So for their item, they have a staff that has all these writings and everything on it, but they have no idea what it says.
But what does it say? I need to know.
I don't know.
Maybe Doldrug will tell us. She needs to know everything. Maybe she already found out.
Yeah, but hopefully she wants to talk about it.
She never does, though. All right.
Dang.
For their name, it shall be Jolene. Jolene.
Okay, I did it. I didn't sing the song. Are you proud of me?
We'll Jolene you later. No, that didn't work.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this session and want to hear more, you can find us on Twitter at DysfictionalPod for our latest updates and downloads.
Original music for this podcast is provided by Joshua Silver, the artist known as Dimonon on Spotify.
And what? No, the Goblin Raid is real. Run! Hide your dice collections. Let me go!